I had made great plans to have an actual Hearthside as part of this, but the camera cannot deal with um, two figures and a virtual background. So we're limited to just a generic background here. But the as I said in my little reminder announcement I made earlier today, we don't want this to be so much a lecture as a conversation. So I'm gonna go through a little chronology of things and give a little explanation and our perspective on some things. I would like to thank His Grace Laurelin, who is here, and His Grace Finvar, who gave me a great deal of their time to reminisce and explain to me some of the things that had happened for Crown tournaments before I started, which was in 1981. The history I've got is not complete, nor is it probably 100% accurate, but I'm going to say so when I think it's hearsay, or this is my remembrance of it. So if we're ready to go, we can get started. So I want to bring up my little thing there.
Oh, and I also want to state, if you have questions, please post them in the chat. We do have a moderator. That's Mistress Giovanna, and she will be reading the questions to us.
Okay. So Crown tournaments, I believe, you need to leave that up for me. Crown tournaments are an integral part of the SCA. They are the beginning and the birth of the SCA. If I'm not mistaken, and please let our moderator know if it can be corrected, somebody who's been in that much longer. One of the first, if not the first event, had a tournament. And at one point, maybe not the first, but very soon after that, one of those tournaments yielded a king and queen. Very soon after that, the king knighted somebody to create the first knight. So it's part of the medieval European framework that we've used to create this sort of hierarchical society. There's also a part and parcel with Crown tournament is the sort of neo-Victorian medieval fantasy that virtue plus inspiration equals victory. So it's all bound up in the mythos of the SCA, Crown tournaments. So just some chronology. 1969 was the first mid-realm Crown tournament. Oh, and that's what we're not talking about Crown tournaments in general. We're talking about the mid-realms Crown tournaments and its traditions and its history. 1969 was the first Crown tournament, official Crown tournament, and Caridach of the Bow wins the first throne. From 1969 to 1975, Crown tournament was open, as it had been in the West and the East. Any authorized fighter could enter. You did not have to reveal your consort unless you were victorious. Now, in the middle, in that period, that led to some improprieties, one might say. A winner accepting bids after winning before their coronation to see who would be their queen. We look at that now and think that's a little odd. 1975 is where things start to change. Any of this, you want to weigh in on any of this if you've heard any. So on 1975, Rolac and Lyndon Lorien are king and queen. And Michael of Borshaven, a young, hot stick, been in the SCA 8 months, wins May crown. His princess girlfriend abdicates and quits the society when he wins. She has no interest in being part of this weird hobby that he's found.
little bit of a freak out there, probably.
Yeah, and it's easy enough to imagine. But very quickly, a replacement princess is found, and that was Tsarina, who reigned, finishes the reign, and later on becomes Moonwolf's queen. But in that October crown, Sir Albert and Sir Polydor bring what I have been told were extremely large shields. The finals are long, boring, and ugly. But Albert eventually wins. Michael, during his reign, has lots of problems and at the end refuses to relinquish the crown. And I am skipping over a lot of drama here, but it is eventually reclaimed by Albert. 1976, Albert and Celine is the first invitation-only crown. It's also the first equipment limitation. Shields are 26 inches and have to be 8 pounds in weight. But the consort is still a secret at this point. So from 1976 to about the time I started, crown is limited to 32 fighters. Chivalry could enter by right. They could simply reserve a spot. In addition to this, a list of 32 unbelted fighters is published in the crown before every coronation in a ranked order. In the pale then forms an invitation, a list of those invited to fighting crown. So that the list, once again, the list is limited to 32. So a list of 32 unbelted names are published. Knights who reserve, it is in ranked order. So every knight that reserved pushes an unbelt off the bottom of the list.
I remember getting issues of the Pale, and all the local fighters were, where am I in the list? Am I on the list? You know, if they're at the bottom, it's like, oh, I'm not going to get to fight.
Right. It became a thing. Every 6 months, local people as well as the fighters themselves looked forward to that Pale edition coming out. Well, looks like I'm getting a correction from Laurel, but it was too.
Yeah, we can look at it
too quick.
Later.
So it became kind of an unofficial martial award in this kingdom, was being on the crown list. And names would be on that list for years. And they would slowly, gradually move up. 1984, and this, I'm not absolutely sure of this. This is a dim recollection of mine. Eliahu and Ellen, in the finals of their crown tournament between Sir Valerius and Count Berengar, Sir Valerius' consort panics before he enters the finals and bows out. A replacement is found from among those already accepted to the list, Fern de la Forêt. Valerius goes on to win, and they have their first reign. This is, I believe, by that time is Fern's second reign. After this, consorts had to be known and pre-approved before they were allowed to fight in crown. Sometime between, now we're going to skip ahead because those were big changes that happened in the 70s and 80s. Between then and 1990, the number limit was dropped. I'm not sure when exactly. Anyone could apply to the crown, but they had to have the sponsorship of a peer, a letter accompanying their letter. This is back when the U.S. Postal Service still sent our letters and back and forth to each other. You would enclose a letter from a peer with their signature that said they were recommending you to be on the crown list. Crown numbers grew quite a bit from that 32 after the numbers limits were gone, because it was an honor to fight in Crown Tournament. Suddenly that honor was open. Anyone could get that honor. So the numbers climbed. By 1990, when I won my first crown, I won the largest crown up until that time at 106. We fought all day in 6 lists, and at 8 p.m. they had to close the site, and we finished the finals outside in the parking lot. So so my first crown, I limited it to 64, and it was a first come, first serve. If you were an unbelt and you got your letter in before a night, you had precedent to enter the tournament. In 1994, Brahmas and Rebecca, the numbers had climbed again. They instituted the tournaments of chivalry. This was in order to sort of give an outlet to those fighters who were coming to Crown to show off, to show their prowess in front of all the knights, because many knights traveled however far they needed to get to Crown Tournament. The tournaments of chivalry were a chance to go and see and fight a bunch of knights without the pressure of Crown Tournament, or potentially winning Crown Tournament if you didn't think you were prepared for that.
And this kept the numbers from going back up into the hundreds.
Right. And the numbers were stayed pretty steady in my recollection, around the 50, 60 range. But I'd say in the last 10 years, numbers have declined to where we are now, where we're having trouble getting a couple of dozen.
Your Majesty,
Yes.
there is a question. Is there any truth to ducal privilege, that is, that a duke could enter and exit a crown tournament at will?
Not in this kingdom, because that would violate our law about, we have, as far as I can tell, always had somebody else might be able to speak to this who's been fighting longer than I have, but kingdom law, going all the way back to the 80s, if I'm not mistaken, is that the crown tournament has to be divided. It has to be. What was that?
It's just a noise.
Oh, okay. Crown tournament is by luck of the draw. The first round has to be by luck of the draw and by no other means. So if you weren't in that first round, you can't be in the tournament. You can't just enter the tournament at whatever point. You're not in the tree. There's no way for you to enter the list if you are not in the list at first. I think there is some mythology swirling around the idea of a duke entering a list to keep somebody out and then dropping out as soon as that person was defeated. Right, then withdraw at will. That's anybody's privilege. Anyone can enter Crown Tournament and withdraw whenever they want. So there's no, I don't see any particular privilege there, and it hasn't happened at least in my memory in this kingdom.
Thank you, Your Majesty. There is obviously in the chat some conversation between His Grace Laurelin and His Grace Eliyahu for a little bit more information from them as well.
Okay, that's good. I had heard of it, but I'd never seen it in practice. I've never seen it in practice in the 40 years I've been fighting in Crown tournaments. So there's that. So that kind of brings us up to current. Although more recently we've had to have the board for the first time enter the fray in our Crown tournaments and dictate to us what our Crown tournaments, how our Crown tournament combatants would be selected. But it doesn't, it only changes the de facto. It's basically codifying what we have done all along. But the kingdom law that actually says that the exact manner of the law itself, I will read it verbatim. The exact manner of conducting the crown list shall be decided solely by the crown, save that once the combatants are chosen, the pairings shall set places in a double elimination list and shall be by the luck of the draw and by no other means. So that was what I was saying initially, that you can't enter the Crown Tournament without being in it from the very beginning. So, and anyone can leave a Crown Tournament at any point for any reason. We can't force somebody to continue fighting if they don't want to fight. So
there is another question. What is the furthest you, Your Majesty, have ever traveled to compete in a Crown Tournament?
Whoa, that's I traveled all over. When they were in Minnesota, I was in Minnesota. When they were in Toronto, I went to Toronto. When they were in Southern Illinois, St. Louis, I think there might have been a Crown Tournament once there. I haven't missed too many in all that time. So
I also see another question here, sort of going back to what we were talking about a little bit before. Can you clarify the difference in the terms invitational list and letters of intent?
Right, an invitational list is, like I said, the list was a list of invitations was published. That constituted your invitation to apply. And then you would send a letter of intent that I am going to accept your invitation. I intend to compete in Crown Tournament. So now we just sort of jumped to that step. I intend to fight in your Crown Tournament. Here is my letter. There's no invitation. There's no pre-invitation necessary. Does that answer the question? I hope.
There was a thank you from Her Grace AnneMarie.
Oh, okay.
That is currently all the questions we have at the moment, but people feel free to put questions into the chat and I will help keep an eye on.
Okay. So we've had the format of Crown Tournament, as far as the individual combats, have changed over the years somewhat. For a long time, it was for most of the history I recall, it was mismatched weapons, single bouts all the way through to the finals. You usually fighters would agree on a weapons mix. They didn't have to match, but they would both agree and know what their opponent was using before they stepped out on the field. More recently, it's been each bout is best 2 out of 3, and sometimes they are matched, sometimes they are mismatched, sometimes it is one fighter has to declare and the other person can choose whatever they want to use to match it, or I get to pick what we will both fight, and then my opponent gets to pick what we will both fight for the next fight, and then we will agree on a third bout, or some third party might pick a third style, the queen, for instance, or I don't think we've actually gone to a luck of the draw, or it has been declared beforehand that if it goes to a third fight, it will be with this weapon style. There have been various shield sizes and weapons restrictions over the years. And sometimes those have been thrown out where there's no weapons, no shield restrictions. Any weapon that's legal in the society can be used in the list. There have been 3 out of 5 finals instead of 2 out of 3. We've had tournaments. The law refers to Crown Tournament, and it allows us to specify that this is the Crown Tournament and this part of the day's fighting is not. So we have had where we didn't want to have buys in the Crown Tournament, because if you've got an odd number of people or something that's not divisible by 4, you can have odd three-way crown, or you have a lot of buys in the first and second round to get to a list that is just the trees paring down to the finals. So we've done things where we had various pool tourneys, with 42 gentlemen and ladies fighting to yield 16 fighters for the crown tournament. So there were no buys, and it was a single or a straight double elimination list with even trees.
I have a question regarding marshalling. Active marshalling has by degrees become common in today's crown tournament. What was marshalling like in the early days?
Well, again, this is my recollections go back far, but not all the way. Since early 80s, we've always had something like active marshalling but the definition I've always understood, even back then, was that the marshals are not there to decide the fight. They are there to help the fighters interpret the action.
And to stand between the consort and her fighter.
Yes, well, that's always been the goal of any really good marshal. Their most important job is to make sure that cameras and spectators have a hard time seeing. But the active marshalling was, the marshals would not wait for the fighters necessarily to call a hold, but to look for a point at which a question seems to have arisen and stop the fight so that it can be asked between the fighters. It's a very subjective thing, and it is applied differently by different marshals and interpreted by different crowns different ways over the years. But it has been misunderstood in other kingdoms to be marshals are in there stopping fights when a blow looks like it was good and telling someone they're dead, and that is not ever how it has been. Marshals are always there for safety reasons. If it looks like a fighter is not taking blows that may eventually injure them, if their opponent keeps escalating, they can stop that fight. But in crown tournaments, typically it has been a matter of looking for a break in a fight. If a fight looks like it is escalating to a point that neither fighter's honor is being served, a hold can be called so that tempers might cool and questions can be asked and answered. But it is done proactively rather than letting the fighters try and sort it out somehow with weapons in hand. That's the primary difference, as I understand it, and as I have always expected it to be carried out in my crowns. Anyone else?
We have currently caught up to all the questions in the chat.
Okay, then I'd like to touch a little bit on why I think crown tournaments, or why I think they're so central to our culture, and some of this history may help to provide some perspective there. That if you travel around to other kingdoms, you will see the difference. That our royalty, the difference in deference, which is
It's hard to say.
very alliterative though. Our crown gets a great deal of respect and deference compared to many other kingdoms, and I absolutely believe that has had to do with for how long we had invitational crown tournaments. We made it in this kingdom a privilege to merely compete for the crown. One had to have a certain amount of renown and respect to even be allowed to step into the list and have a chance at becoming the crown. So when you won, you had this sort of base level of respect. And if you were a responsible monarch, you could build on that and cement your reputation in the kingdom. So it became important, and those who entered the crown and won that way took that responsibility very seriously. And I think as we have moved further and further away from an invitation only crown, I think we have lost that somewhat, that the respect for the crown, well, cause and effect are difficult to separate here, but I think that you found that anybody who could enter any time didn't have respect for the office as much as some others might have previous to them. And if they didn't have respect for the office when they stepped in, they didn't treat the office with great respect. So that undermined the respect further for the office, and it snowballs a little bit. So I for many years, for a couple of decades, we fought with an invitational only crown, and I think it served us very well to do that. And we have gotten away from it, and now we can't even do it at all. So I'm not sure where that's going to go. There's also, for a while, there was a myth floating around that it cost $10,000 out of pocket to be royalty, and that is simply false. That you could certainly spend $10,000 of your money on
if you want to,
on being royalty. You can absolutely, yeah, you can absolutely do that.
You can spend that not being royalty.
Right, and you can give lavish gifts, and you can travel on your own dime after you've run out of the very generous mid-realm stipend. But if that kind of money were necessary, I could never have sat the throne. So the kingdom is vast, and has been vaster still in the early years, but it's also generous, and the people of the mid-realm have always come together to help fund the travel of the royalty so that they can make it to their events,
and providing largesse for gifting.
Yeah, exactly. That generosity extends in so many directions. It's hard to even catalog it.
Yeah, the generosity of the kingdom allows the royalty to actually do their jobs
and look good doing it.
So there is a question, when and how did the Royal Travel Fund come to be, speaking of which?
Well, I don't know, honestly. There has always been one. Back in 1990, the stipend was $525 for a year of travel. And at that time, the kingdom extended into North Shield and Eldermere. Before that, Callantyre was part of it, and I don't know what the stipend was before then. That can go down now. So now it's $5,000, and it's there, and only I think a very few times has that actually been exhausted in a reign.
We never have.
We've always rolled money back in.
Duke Eliyahu said that in his first reign in 1984, the travel fund was $25.
Wow.
There you go.
And
I would submit that part of that was that if you're king and queen, you are active traveling SCA people anyway, and that this was only supposed to cover
postage stamps.
Well, that might have been travel. We had a separate postage office stipend. Travel was $525. But it may be that this was just, here, if you were, here's for going to a couple of extra events that you wouldn't normally go to. And gas was probably, well, no, in 80, it was probably up above $2 a gallon. But I've reigned when gas was $2 a gallon. I've reigned when gas was $5 a gallon. And the money, there was always enough money.
Duchess Anor asks, how much say does the king, and I would like to also add queen, have over their crown tournaments?
Well, just like the law I just read, the exact manner of conducting the crown list shall be decided solely by the crown. Now, that is only limited by that double elimination list and luck of the draw setting. Beyond that,
I guess anything goes, but
right,
depends on what you want to do and how you want to be remembered.
Yeah, right. But control over which I could, the king could say, or the crown could say, this tournament is only going to be fought with left-handed dagger and buckler. That's how the whole tournament is going to be conducted. Or the whole tournament is going to be fought with 6-foot spear. Or everyone who wishes to apply must have an AOA and served as a local officer at least. There are hurdles you can put in the way.
There have been some crowns that ask for an ANS entry.
Yep. Right. And it's just an entry. It doesn't have to be a winning ANS thing. It's just right. I could fire harden a sharp stick and say, look, I've made a spear, and that's my entry. They usually go a little further than that.
Yeah.
Although now with the law change, I'm not sure about some of those restrictions. About saying that you have to have an AOA or that you have to have done this or accomplished something, some arbitrary requirement. The way the law is now, there you have to, basically anyone can be allowed, anyone should be allowed, and if they are not allowed, you have to let them know why in writing. So
a question was asked, what was the most restrictive crown in terms of weapons mix, weapon sizes, shield sizes, and so on that you ever fought in?
Well, I believe that was Valharic's reign, and there was some weird like spear and shield, and there was no 2-weapon allowed, but I don't remember it exactly. Somebody else in the audience might, but it was odd. There were only 5 weapon styles allowed, and they were all sort of neo-Roman-esque. Yeah, I don't remember them all exactly. Sword and shield was still allowed. I think that spear and shield was a style. I think polearm was disallowed, but 6-foot spear was okay. That's the most restrictive one I can think of, and I'm not sure, honestly, that I competed in that one.
Nikolai said that Val's crown was the first best of 3 for all bouts tourney, and he said it caused quite a stir.
Yeah, that's true too, that there was a best 2 of 3. But what I remember most was the sort of bizarre weapons selections that we were given. And I'm going to make my own sort of political statement about crown tournaments here, that I think that crown should be, that I think limiting weapons arbitrarily too much, or forcing combatants to fight with weapons that they are not highly skilled with or particularly familiar with is a disservice to the tournament and the fighters, in that I believe crown the purpose for crown is to yield the best fighter that day. And I think the best fighter is best displayed with their best weapon. So all of my crown tournaments I've tried to make sure that it was the best fighters fighting with their best styles throughout the tournament. But that is my personal view about crown tournaments. But since we're running this gig, I can say that.
There are currently no, I've caught up again. So if anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat.
I'm interested in your, so why don't you expound a little bit on what it's like to be a consort?
At the crown tourney?
Yeah. What's your experience of it?
Well, it's a little nerve-wracking. You're watching the next chapter of the kingdom unfold before you. And as you get closer and closer to the finals, in your head, you're probably thinking, okay, I'm okay if it's any of these four, or only these three and not that one. Just personally about, you know, any kind of personality interaction you may have with that person, or you really want to see this person become a king and queen because you've admired them for years and know that they're on the path to this. But that kind of anxiety is always going on at the crown tourney. You sit there and you look regal and you don't let anybody know that you're freaking out about it.
Well, now, are you talking about being the queen watching your own
being
crown
the
tournament?
queen watching my own crown tournament?
And I'm talking about you've got a fighter in the list.
Oh,
how does that feel?
Well, my first time it was nerve-wracking. My first time through that. The second time, I remember I was standing with Tessa at the side, and it was, I think, the end of the tourney. No, you were actually fighting Luder at that point. And the consorts were all given worry stones. And so she was really worrying at her stone. And I'm just standing there watching the tourney. She said, how come you're not freaking out? And I said, because he hasn't been practicing. He's not going to win. So I don't have to worry about it. And you won that day. Since I've done it, I've been there more than once now. Standing at the tournament is not as big of a deal as it used to be. I mean, anxiety wise. But I can see how a first timer is freaking out inside a lot.
And similar is true for fighters. And I recommend to anybody who is watching this, because they think they might be interested someday in fighting a crown tournament, start fighting in crown tournaments. If you ever think you want to win a crown tournament, start fighting in them.
And as a consort, watch tournaments.
Understand what's going on out there. I've known many experienced fighters who depend on their consorts for advice and observations and encouragement during tournaments. Being able to speak intelligently about what your fighter is doing is useful, helpful. And what you say about the more you watch and the more you participate in those, the less stressful they become.
Right.
And that's true too for fighters.
There are times I try to go stand with the other consort to whoever you're fighting.
Oh, well, that's nice.
That way we can kind of freak out together.
Well, and it also gives the both opponents like a single place to, we're not looking around. But as a fighter too, if the more experienced you get with crown tournaments, the less anxiety and the you can get outside of your own head a little easier once you've been in a few crown tournaments.
I assume at that point it just becomes just another tournament. At least
it is
another tournament, but with little higher consequences if you win.
Well, right, crown tournament. And the reason I like I have always enjoyed fighting in crown tournaments is because it's the only tournament that we do that actually matters. Who wins? Who wins, who loses, in any other tournament doesn't, who cares? It's you, I don't know how many sets of candlesticks and mugs I've won over the years, and that's all that was on the line in a particular tournament. At a crown, you are going to have an effect on your own SCA experience to a great degree, and you are going to be asked to affect others to some extent for as much as a year. So,
Right.
but you can't let that be in your mind while you're fighting.
While you're fighting, it has to just be a tournament.
It has to just be a fight.
Oh,
This single fight is all that matters at any given time. And I would say that that's another skill that crown tournaments, just like the shield sizes that we used to have in crown tournament, crown tournament limits were 26 inches. And so that just became sort of a kingdom standard. Everybody had a shield that was 26 inches or less. We used to fight in tournaments. We used to have more elimination style tournaments where if you didn't perform, you were out. And you waited till the next fighting activity, or you went and did pickups if there was room, or a marshal to oversee it or whatever. And you by fighting in those kinds of tournaments, you learn how to handle that pressure, or how to not handle or not be bothered by that kind of pressure. So that when you got to crown tournament, you were more ready, you were more focused, you were better prepared to perform that one shot fight. Over the years, we adopted this sort of, oh, all these guys traveled so far and they're out in 2 rounds. That's no fun. Let's give them a whole day of fighting. And that's fine. There's certainly value to that, but you have lost the skill of focusing on each single fight as if that was the only fight of the day. So once again, fighting, the only way to, I've always said that we practice in melees to fight at war, and we fight in tournaments to practice for crown. So however, if your tournament isn't good practice for the experience of crown, it doesn't go to your preparation for crown. The best way to prepare for crown is to fight in crown and keep fighting in crown.
So there's a question that sort of is related to what you were just speaking to, Your Majesty. Do the two of you as a couple, do you do anything special to prep for crown tournament?
I don't.
Make sure her dress is pressed,
Yeah.
because there may be pictures. For myself, my routine for crown tournament isn't particularly different from any other tournament. I like to spruce up my shield, make sure that my weapons are all nice and cleanly taped and undamaged.
Yeah, you have a taping routine you do.
Yeah, but I do that whenever my swords get to a certain point. I go through the same routine.
But you always do it before crown tourney.
Oh, well, always. Well, I want, particularly for crown tournament, I want my weapons to be in good shape and looking good.
Mm-hmm.
Often I'm making a new weapon just a few weeks before, so that it's nice and hard and crisp, and it makes the right sound when it hits metal. And I always tape my swords the same way, so there's no different way I prepare for crown equipment wise. One thing I will do, and one thing I tell newer fighters or guys when I'm giving advice about crown, is any documents that you need to take, like your membership card, your authorization card, anything like that, make sure that you physically touch them and put them in your armor bag or wherever it is before you are preparing to leave. Just go put your hands on them to make sure that you have them. Don't assume, now they're in my armored bag, or, oh, they're always in my wallet, or, you know, they're in my, I left them in my guard bag last event. Go find them, get them, prepare them. Now that is probably not so necessary anymore, where everyone is vetted before they get to the tournament, or you're not allowed to fight anyway. But, you know, talking about the taping routine, I like to do the taping routine the day before we leave. And I guess I think of it as sort of sharpening my weapons, you know, because it's that sound, and it's making sure that my edges are true, so that when I'm holding the sword, I know where my edges are exactly, and they're clearly marked. So there is some ritual to it, but it's kind of the same for every tournament. I'm really kind of saying I do that for every tournament that I'm going to go fight in.
So there is a question. I'm going to combine two questions a little bit. They were similar, so I'm going to put them together. There's a concept of fighting crown as consort, right? That is, the consort's participation is equally as important to the outcome as the fighter's participation. One part of the question was, does the consort have to be present in current crown tournaments? But additionally, can you speak to the idea of the consort's participation, and how does it fit in with your experience?
Well, the consort's not required to be there, just has to be declared.
Right.
And we've seen that in recent years, where Kellick has had his little picture of Vukasin that he's paraded around. His icon of Vukasin, that is, he carries it with him for the entire day, and that's part of, he walks up during the presentation of the consorts, so his consort is, her image is with him. So no, it is not required.
As far as participation, though,
well, participation, the only thing I have ever done is I stand at the list to watch you fight.
Right. And I think that that may vary from couple to couple, that how you interact during the tournament is probably important, but it's going to vary from couple to couple. Some fighters may want to sit down and get out of their head for a minute and just talk with their consort and relax and have fun with their friends and not be hyper focused the whole time. And some are completely the opposite, where they don't want to be bothered by anyone. They want to sit down, they want to review their last fight, they want to go over their mental game film for the next fight or whatever. It varies. So, but I think that a consort can facilitate whatever they know their fighter's preferred mode is at crown. Making sure that they've got water, making sure that, I mean, this is also a squire, or the new wave, I understand, of having a corner man, which I find hilarious. But just being there to facilitate them so that they don't have to think about anything but the tournament, I think is important. It doesn't all have to be done by the consort. Sometimes it is. Sometimes a fighter can have a whole support staff of, you know, a handful of people taking care of various things, making sure that their weapons are to hand, and you know, being there at the edge of the list to take their weapons from them as they come off, that sort of thing. A consort can certainly do that if there isn't somebody else to do it. But I've never asked my consort to do any of that sort of thing.
Maybe an occasional square knot.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Pointing an arm if my shiftless squire isn't around.
I have a question about armor. How does the armor you wear for crown differ from the armor you wear for other tournaments or for melee?
Well, for melee, for myself, and I can only speak to my own armor and experience there. My armor for melee is designed more for standing and running around than it is for fighting, because that's more, I do more standing and running around in melee, like particularly at Penzic, than I do actually fighting. So that's what my armor is designed for. Armor for tournament, it's the same armor. You've got to be so familiar with your equipment and how it works that if you're not fighting in that armor all the time, or some very, very close version of it, you can do yourself or your opponent a disservice when you are not, if you do not recognize how your armor is acting on the field. If you're not feeling blows, or blows are landing that you wouldn't otherwise take, you're not sure how to read those. So my advice is always wear what you wear and fight with what you fight with. Don't switch up for Crown Tournament. I mean, if you've got you want a nice new surcoat or something for Crown so you look spiff, that's great. That's always encouraged. But if it differs significantly from what you're used to wearing, you should get a couple of weeks practice in it. Risk getting it a little dirty so that you can call your blows effectively. Or I've also advised people to make up a plain version of it that they can wear for practice in advance of Crown Tournament, so that they are prepared for, like, how you're, if it's got sleeves that drape, or a long skirt or something, you've got to be used to it. There have been times when I've fought with Spalders and I didn't wear them in Crown Tournament, and that's okay. But my plain advice is, don't wear something new or different, radically new or different for Crown Tournament. If you're not used to it, it can get in your way. It can be a distraction. If you're not used to how it feels, just fighting in it can be a distraction, let alone getting hit on an unfamiliar piece of armor and not being sure how to calibrate for it.
Do you, Your Majesty, do you fight in the color and arms of your heraldry, or fight in the colors and arms of your consort?
I haven't fought in your colors. No. I have fought under your colors.
Yes, and you have two different looks that you have fought under.
Well, in recent years, I used to fight in that black leather ring jack for a few years. No, I didn't actually either. Won my first crown in my livery. Yeah, mostly I've got my arms and my heraldry, and then I've got a sort of black and gray outfit that it's basically just a surcoat is the only difference, and they're made identically, like I was saying, that it doesn't act or feel different from my regular surcoat. They're made from the same pattern and the same fabric, just different colors.
You've had three different shield covers.
Yeah, but again, that's just the shield cover. The shield is the shield. Yep. And I've got one that's a black knight on a gray field, a black chest knight on a gray field. I've got one that is an impreza, which is a sort of it's not heraldic, it's a depiction of a scene that I made for one Crown Tournament where I fought for you. And it has a wolf and a sort of armored Cupid with a little spear, and there's a little banner that says Amor domat lupum, which means love tames the wolf. And I just wore a black surcoat with that. I've got it's pretty tattered now because I wore it in several crowns, but I have one that's gray, party colored gray with black chest knights and black with a gold ducal coronet on one side. And I for the list shield, I've got my arms and I've got her arms. And if I'm wearing black, I will be usually fighting under her arms. If I'm wearing my heraldry, I'm fighting under my own. So, but I've switched it up lots of different ways over the years.
Thank you, Your Majesty. Following this question, a follow-up for this question is: should the consorts wear their personal heraldry colors or their combatants?
They can wear whatever they
Whatever
want.
they want.
Personal preference.
I think I've worn your colors a couple of times. I used to
Yeah.
wear that blue and black velvet for the winter crown tournament.
Because it was warmer.
Yeah. And then my own heraldic coat hardy, the one that's the silk, in the summer
Yeah.
crown tourneys. And in recent years, I just wear whatever I feel like wearing that day, depending on the weather.
Right. So that's all. What one should or shouldn't do is a personal preference thing. I think both have their value. I can't say anything beyond personal preference. Support each other, wear each other's colors. I'd love to see some
Be comfortable.
be comfortable. I'd love to see some couples wearing like half and half, you know. That would be, I think that would
Half
be
of each other's arms.
Yeah.
Oh.
Like a divided field
Mhm.
on arms wearing.
Makes sense.
There is one more question here. What was your rank as a fighter when you fought your first crown? And other than skill, how does your experience differ from when you fight now as a super duke, quote unquote?
Well, when I first started, I'd fought in my first crown tournament inside of my first year of fighting. So I was a nobody. I was the lowest of the low, not a squire, never was a squire. And that was in 1981. And I fought in crown tournaments, and I fought. In 86, I was for the accolade, and I fought, and I was finalist. I think, I don't remember what year it was. It had to have been 85 or 86. Palomar and I were the first two unbelts to go all the way through crown, and it's a very important distinction because Laurelin will call me on this, that he and Aylin were the first two unbelts to make it to the finals, but they were knighted before they got out of the finals. So Palomar and I went through the finals as unbelts. He reigned as an unbelt, and I was knighted by Aylin while he was prince, and he will never forgive me for that. Even though I'd been fighting for a couple years longer than him. So I made my way up through the ranks, but now I can say with very little conceit that my best weapon style now is sword and reputation. I can use my rank, and any fighter who says that they're not using their rank to advantage is lying, even if they don't realize it. Everything I do on the field, my opponent has to take seriously. That's like I said, I can say that with very little conceit, because if I'm fighting a duke or I'm fighting a very experienced knight, I can't sleep on him. So that helps. You know, and you shouldn't bet against a royal peer in crown tournament, because again, they've done it. They've entered a rather small club, and they have shown themselves and others that they have what it takes to get all the way through. So, you know, it's kind of the extension of I think it was Bat Masterson who said, the only thing you know for sure about a guy who's carrying a gun is that he's undefeated. And that's one thing you know about a royal peer, is that they've done it. They have already accomplished the thing you're trying to do. You've got to respect that on the field. So whether or not that has affected how I fight, I think it has affected what I think or maybe my confidence might be the best way to say. I'm more attuned to what I can get away with and what I can't.
Thank you, Your Majesty. His Grace Laurelin said that the first unbelted king to serve a full reign was Nathan, who was king
Really?
when he won his first crown, and he offered Nathan the acolyte in his reign following his.
Okay. Well, I didn't say that Palmer was the first unbelted king or the unbelted winner of crown, only that Palomar and I were the first two unbelted finalists together.
They were still
And-
unbelted at the end of the finals.
Yeah, and the fact that Nathan, I thought it was always Nathan, maybe not, but Nathan was knighted during his reign or during the time he was prince or whatever. Palomar was not. Palomar finished his reign as an unbelt, so difference there, but only a technical point, Your Grace. Thank you. So we've run over our time, but it's been fun.
Thank you all for joining us.
Hope that this has been at least somewhat educational. I learned some things in my my research of this. So join us next month for our next exciting installment. I don't remember what it is. Giovanna, do you have it?
I'm like trying to bring it up as fast as possible.
I've got too much on my screen.
Yeah, give me 1 second. I'm almost there. I'm like, oh. So next month will be January 3rd, and it will be a session on courtly etiquette.
Oh, that's right.
Very good.
Thank
That's
you
not
so
going to
much,
be
Your
so
Majesty.
much it'll be something of a history, but it's going to be more about current culture and what are we doing here. But we hope y'all will show up and
Invite the newbies.
yeah, really, really
That'll be good for them. And some of the older folks too.
sit down and sit down in a room with a bunch of your new people with popcorn.
Thank you so much, Your Majesties.
Thank you,
Thank you for moderating.
Of course.
and everyone have a good night.